everybody, welcome back to Unlimited Commander. Today I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Matt. Matt, how's it going?
It's not going too bad, this week we've been building up new furniture in the house, so there is styrofoam everywhere. But other than that, I'm glad that we are getting some new things in. Got the entertainment center coming in. I've got a couple of cool things coming in for streaming. So later this week we're going to have some fun. Hopefully I'll be able to do some really cool stuff coming on. What about you? How are things over there?
Well, one thing I'm particularly excited about is at the time of recording, we got an announcement yesterday for. Oh, I dropped my pen. I'll get that in a sec. We got an announcement for something that's right up our alley. And we talk a lot about limited versus commander. And we've talked about how some of the best ways to try and meld it is with Wizards provided products like Commander Legends and Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. And yesterday, again, at the time of recording, because recording and time are constructs and made up anyway, but we just got Commander Masters announced. And I am excited for it.
Yes, it did. And when it first came out, when I first saw the announcement, I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it because, I'm just like, this is more money that I need to have laying around for when August rolls around. And I just want to make sure that I can, afford the things I need along with the things I want. But after I took a step back from that for a minute, it's just like, it's so cool to have these products come out every once in a while that really blend what we like to do with limited formats and commander formats. And Commander Masters is probably going to be another commander draftable format. It will probably work well in Commander Sealed. It'll be a really high powered box commander set, I'll say. So I am super excited to see the kind of stuff that comes out of it and the kind of card evaluations we'll be doing for that set. Plus, I really like pre-con decks, and we're probably going to get 4 really strong pre-con decks out of that set.
Oh, I strongly suggest everyone take a look at it. We're not a news podcast by any stretch, but they did announce at least 4 commander decks. We got themes for all of them. We get colorless Eldrazi precon. We get a 5-color sliver precon. Something to do with Esper enchantments, and then oh crap, I forget the 4th one. I'm not going to look it up right now.
And then Bird.
Strongly recommend.
Bird. And Bird.
But so the precons are all like really strong themes that people have been asking for a long time that just do not fit anywhere else. It's a fully reprint set. It's a master set through and through. So a lot of high value, high impact reprints that we haven't had in a long time. There's not a lot of information out yet. I do know that they released a preview of the Ur-Dragon. So the Ur-Dragon is going to be a card in a booster. And the cover art on the box for the collector boosters is a jewel. Oh no, they released the promo version, full art version of a Jeweled Lotus. So we're getting a couple of high value, high impact reprints, but realistically, I'm only here because I know that it's going to be a great draft set. There's going to be a lot of stuff in there that we need. I mean, being all reprints is like anything else. Open it if you want the cards because you don't have them, and there's going to be good value to it. But from our perspective and what we care about, I guarantee this is going to be a out of the park success as far as like a limited environment goes.
I have very little doubt in that. High power formats are very interesting, and I think we'll get into this a little later when we start talking about things. But I really enjoy high powered sets within their bubble. Mm-hmm. And I think that in this particular case, it's going to feel like you're drafting like power cubes. Mm-hmm. Like it's going to have a lot of good stuff in it that you're just gonna be like, I'm glad I'm doing this at a table with a bunch of people rather than doing this in my 4-pod in constructed work.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some salty, sweaty stuff in there. Don't you doubt. Sorry, one sec. I just for the audience that's watching us on YouTube, the cat continuously walks across my desk, and I don't mind when she's on the desk, but I do mind when she tries to walk underneath the monitors because there's enough there to wreck. So that's when you see the cat go yeet right off the desk. So you'll see that on YouTube. Go check us out on YouTube. Like and subscribe. We could use some likes over there too. Leave a comment.
And anytime you don't see Squints, you should be commenting, "Where's Squints?"
Where's Squints? Yeah. Streaming all over again.
Oh, man.
So anyway, that's the thing I'm looking forward to. The big news out there right now. There was some other announcements. MagicCon Philly was this past weekend, and a lot of cool stuff came out of there. But I just wanted to make sure that we all heard about specifically the fact that the one thing that we care about. We care about Limited and Commander, and they're giving us yet another great hit. Yep. Looking forward to it.
Yep, we got it. We got an announcement on March of the Machines and a few new cards coming out of that. Don't think we're going to touch on that too much today, but maybe I'll talk a little bit about it before March of the Machines becomes a thing.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of good stuff we're going to want to talk about in there.
We'll figure out what's going on with that. But while we are on that subject, Adam, we said that there's going to be a bunch of super sweaty stuff potentially coming out of Commander's Masters. But how do we know if a card is sweaty or
not? Is it in a CDH deck?
That's a good start. That's a very good start.
I digress. I know where you're going with this. That was an excellent segue that I completely derailed, and I do not apologize at all.
Don't worry.
So yeah, that's excellent segue to today's topic. Is this a good card? It's really tough to tell if a card is good across multiple formats. Those of us who have gotten into Commander have probably gotten pretty good at being able to tell just at a glance, like once you get into a format and you do it pretty routinely, whether or not a card's going to be really good in your deck or any deck for that matter. Dockside.
Dockside's okay.
But it's a little bit tougher to tell in something like a rotating format like Standard or a limited format such as All Will Be One Draft, for example. So that's why you're here, because I'm really bad at it. We've discussed on multiple occasions how I do not know how to evaluate stuff in limited formats that aren't Commander. So tell me, Matt, what makes a card good?
So obviously, all cards are good or bad depending on the context in which they're played. I want to get that out of the way first, is just remember that context is the most important thing of what you're doing. What format you're in, who you're playing with, what kind of gain you're looking for. All of those things will shift the whether or not a card is good or bad, powerful or weak. Just because of life, philosophies toward deck building, all those kind of things, they're all important. But we're going to start at the basics, and that is what we call the bland baseline, also known as the vanilla threshold. So, for those of you out there who haven't played a lot of Magic, hi again, welcome to Magic. And let me tell you a little bit about this baseline thing. So, in Magic, we have this situation where things cost a certain amount of mana, and they have a certain power and toughness. The vanilla threshold is this idea that at the cost of 1, 2, 3, 4 mana value, things should have a relatively even power and toughness along that line. So a 1/1 for 1, a 2/2 for 2, a 3/3 for 3, etc., 6/6 for 6, is considered sort of the baseline of where you want a card that has no abilities. Anything that has no extra text, vanilla is what we call that. Now, it doesn't have to be a perfect 3/3 for 3. For instance, a 4/2 at 3, same amount of power and toughness, but kind of spread out a little differently, is also considered pretty good stats at that point. It's only when you start getting into like a 0/6 at 3 that you're like, well, I mean, that's a lot of toughness. Does it do anything? Like you kind of want to do that. But in general, that's kind of where you're looking at. 1/1 for 1, 2/2 for 2. And that is what we call the bland baseline. In Constructed, that is the lowest you want your cards to be going. because in constructed formats, you can play anything, anything within the range of what they allow. And you can play multiple copies of cards. You get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of power differentiation. So you don't want to be playing cards that are just a 3/3 for 3 if you can avoid it in constructed. But you certainly don't want to be playing anything worse than that.
No.
In limited formats, however, in draft and in sealed specifically, those formats allow you to play those cards, and those are actually considered pretty decent cards. Are they knock out of the park great? Not necessarily. But if your deck's worst cards are your 6/6 for 6 with no abilities, you're feeling pretty good about that. Because that means that your deck is running above where you would expect some things to be. And in sealed, especially where your pool is so limited, you really want some of those. Like sometimes you just need a big dork to swing with. So even something like a 6/6 for 7 might be considered good in the right format in sealed. So again, those contexts are important, but that's sort of the baseline.
Yeah. And there's lots of other podcasts that'll help you evaluate how every card in a set is in its own limited format. And we do recommend taking a look at some of those because they'll tell you, for example, Strixhaven was very spell heavy. The creatures mattered very little by comparison, and you wanted to make sure you drafted as many spells as you could and the odd creature that cared about those spells. Whereas I've heard a lot about Phyrexia All Will Be One, which is the current set. Those creatures are what matter. You need to get creatures on the board to avoid getting hit. You need to get creatures out so you can get your first toxic counters or your poison counters put on with your toxic creatures. So if you're going to go into a limited format and you want to get the most out of it and you're into podcasts already, do recommend checking out some of those because they will go into each card in depth and explain why they're good and what you're going to want to do with them. So as you said, like context dependent, everything's going to have some goodness and some badness to it depending on what you're playing in it. Do you have a card that you would suggest was good in any sort of limited capacity?
I would. And this time around, I wanted to pick a card that I know hosed in limited. Like it was considered something that was an absolute must. Back when Theros Beyond Death was the draft format, and it was 3 packs of Theros Beyond Death, or if you're playing sealed, 6 packs of Theros Beyond Death. If you got this card, this was considered your in. You definitely wanted to try to play this, even if it meant playing out of color, even if it meant the rest of your pool was very thin. And that card is Dream Trawler.
Quickly prattle it off here. So Dream Trawler is 2 white and 2 blue, so 6 mana for a 3/5 Sphinx with flying and lifelink. And whenever you draw a card, Dream Trawler gets +1/+0 till end of turn. Whenever Dream Trawler attacks, draw a card. And then discard a card. Dream Trawler gains hexproof until end of turn. Tap it.
Okay.
Why was this so good?
So this card was so good because of a few things. First off, flying and lifelink. So that in sealed and draft, where you're going to see many more limited flyers in your pool, a 3/5 with flying is going to hit. It's going to hit almost every single turn. And then lifelink is also going to mean that you take less damage every single turn because you are going to get that 3 life. But it's usually not just a 3/5 with flying and lifelink. If this were just a 3/5 with flying and lifelink 4/6, this card would already be way above scale for what people would consider a good sealed card. Maybe not so much in draft, but definitely in sealed. Then when you draw a card, it gets +1/+0 till end of turn. So it's going to be a 4/5 every turn regardless, which puts it way closer to that baseline that I was talking about. Whenever it attacks, you draw a card, which means that it's going to be a 5/5 every turn regardless, because you draw on your first step and then you draw when it attacks, which means it's a 5/5 for 6 with flying and lifelink, way above baseline right now. And then you can also discard a card to give it hexproof until end of turn. So if your opponent had any targeted kill whatsoever, which was already kind of hard to come across in Theros Beyond Death, you could just keep it from hitting Dream Trawler by discarding a card. This card was so insane that people were, I believe it was one of the major Pro Tour events during the season where someone was Impact 2. They were very off of blue-white. They had not done any blue-white yet. They saw the Dream Trawler and they immediately switched gears. And they had to force a blue-white deck out of 2 packs, which was that's not easy to do. It's not easy to completely jump ship from one color to another color, especially reading all the signs of the room and all that stuff. But it didn't matter because they had a Dream Trawler and that matters. So, like, this is the kind of card that if you were playing on Arena, if you saw it, you're just like, this is mine. If you saw it across the thing at your opponent's thing, you're like, I can just resign this game and start the next one. I don't have to go through the motions. So it was a heavy hitter. In Limited. In Standard, not so much. It's not that it's not good. It's still a pretty good card. A 5/5 for 6, flying lifelink, and getting you an extra card and being able to protect it is still a pretty good card. But when you take into the context of being able to play 4 copies of cards, it's a lot easier for your opponent to go, I use a kill spell. Okay, I'll discard a card to keep it alive. Another kill spell on top of that discard. So now you got to discard 2 cards to keep it alive. That's not quite as good. And there are other things that are way, way better in that same format to play at the time. I think the big thing they were shooting at the time was Pioneer. And Pioneer at the time, because of Underworld Breach, had the Inverter Thoracle combo, which was insanity. It basically means that you get to completely deck yourself and then auto win the game because you decked yourself. It was a nuts deck in Pioneer at the time. Dream Trawler's not going to do much in that format. You're just not going to get there.
And even their standard wasn't anything to do with that. I think the standard at the time was Alrund's Epiphany. No, that was later on. What was it in? Something to do with something. Now I forget.
I mean, you've got the right idea though. Like we're kind of in the Epiphany area where it's about taking multiple turns and control decking and things like that. And Dream Trawler just wasn't in the colors that you needed for it. Like blue, yes, but white, not really. There was also, I think, like some Teferi control going on during that time period. And Dream Trawler.
That's what was happening at the time. 3 fairy.
Yeah. 3 fairy was a big deal. 3 cost Teferi, by the way, is just it's a card that made it so that your opponent couldn't play things at instant speed. It was a nightmare.
Where did you go here? Should probably. Teferi Time Raveler. That's what it was.
Yeah, it's a very Time Raveler. Yeah.
1 a white and a blue for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. Each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. At +1 for until your next turn, you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. And -3 was return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand and draw a card. So like the value on that thing is insane, and 0 point to be even looking at running a Dream Trawler in there because you were just drawing spells and casting spells, or drawing cards and casting spells and controlling the opponent's board. White blue at the time was a huge control deck. Nothing to do with beating face.
And it's a huge example of that context dependency, right? Because for 6 costs, getting all of the stuff on Dream Trawler is a dream in Sealed. But in Constructed, you're getting as much text on a 3 cost in the same colors in Constructed. So what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Like you see a card like this, it looks really good on paper. A lot of people experimented with this, but at the end, like I don't ever see this card played in Commander either.
No. This is a piece of junk in Commander at 6 mana.
Yeah, 6 mana. You're finishing games. You're not elongating the game for another 16 turns because you're trying to fly and lifelink.
Like, I think the only place it fits, and even then, would be if you were doing like Sphinx Tribal, because it just kind of plays into those themes anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a again, it's like a 5/5 flying Sphinx that probably gets way bigger than 5/5. It's probably more like a 7 or 8/5, but
Yeah.
that would be the only place I would see it. Like
Yeah.
6 mana in Commander better not win you the game, but swing it in your favor. And like a 6 mana beater, flying lifelink aside, is not going to get you there.
Yeah, and
go
ahead.
I was going to say, what will get you there in Constructed though? Tyvar Kell.
There we go.
Hey, working on our segues. Tyvar Kell. We're going to switch to talk about a card that was good in Constructed that won't get you very far if you find it in Limited. Tyvar Kell, of course, being the 2 green Planeswalker, 3 loyalty, and it says elves you control have tap to add a black. +1, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 elf, untap it, and it gains death touch till end of turn. 0 creates you a 1/1. And -6 is you get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn, and you draw 2 cards. This is a great card in a constructed elf deck. Great card. Friggin' house. It protects itself for less, for less of a cost than a minus. Like most times when a planeswalker protects itself, it's going to minus itself. If you're playing elves, then they all become mana dorks for a color that isn't green, which is one that they normally have anyway. And then if you do manage to pull off the ultimate with it, it basically just says you win the game, because the biggest problem in an elf deck is drawing cards and waiting a turn to swing with them. This fixes all your problems. This is great. But would this be good in Limited?
So that's the thing. So in the Limited that it would come out of, which is Kaldheim Limited, by the way, there were a lot of different decks in the Kaldheim Limited structure that were considered good, especially in Draft. Elves was not one of them. Not only was there not a lot of elves, there were some good elves, but there were not a lot of elves. There was also a big fight over the shapeshifter cards that could be elves, because the shapeshifter deck had its own rewards of playing, and if you were playing any other sort of tribal in the set, you could always pick up the shapeshifters and play toward your own tribal themes. So because of that, you just weren't going to hit the massive cards you needed in Draft, and in Sealed, it was practically impossible. If you got Tyvar Kell, you were hoping for 2 other elf rares at least, and then the other elves that came out of the common and uncommon spots, and you weren't going to get there. It wasn't going to happen. And not to say you wouldn't maybe throw it in a green deck if you were playing Sealed, only because it creates 1/1 elves that can do stuff. But you're not going to want to ultimate them ever. You're just hoping to keep putting out token blockers while you do whatever it is, the thing you're doing. And then the fact that they tap for black is icing rather than being crucial to the whatever it is you're trying to build.
Yeah, that 1/1/1 you're going to make out of it then taps for a black, which might help you on the next turn. But you know that little critter is going to end up being a blocker for something in Limited, and they're going to try everything they can to take care of this thing that's generating blockers for you. Like, I don't see this being a Limited card in my limited experience.
Yeah.
It doesn't strike me as something that would be very strong in a Limited deck. I mean, maybe if you were lucky and you were in the right pod in Draft and you were getting past like Herald, King of Skemfar, and all of the little critters in because it was black green, and that was basically all they were doing. There wasn't a self mill theme really.
Yeah,
black kind of did it, but that was more with, I think, black blue was the mill in that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's not a lot going on there, but if you're in a pod and people keep you first pick a Tyvar Kell and then you're focusing on taking the changelings, you might be able to shut someone out of a thing. But honestly, whenever it came to drafting this set, if I saw a Tyvar going around the table, it continues going around the table. It's just going to get wheeled. And if you ever saw it in Sealed, you were just hoping that you got another mythic instead. You were wishing that you got another mythic instead because it just isn't. It didn't have enough value in that spot. Just real quick, I wanted to talk. We talked about sort of the bland baseline for creatures. I would say that Tyvar Kell kind of sits on what I think of as the base bland line for planeswalkers. It's got a +1 that can kind of protect itself. Its -6 is very good in the decks that it wants to be in, but other than that is not super great. And it is mildly low loyalty in comparison to its mana cost. So that kind of sits where I want planeswalkers to be on sort of a bland baseline idea. So Tyvar Kell fits all of those notes, but it just so happens that in sealed, that's not good enough for a planeswalker.
What's really funny is that it did so little in limited that they have a separate arena version. It's still 4 mana, but instead it comes out with 4 loyalty counters. The +1 puts 2 +1 counters on an elf. Where's the difference here? Oh, but the ultimate is -7 instead. So it wasn't good enough for limited. They saw it not getting picked. So when they did like the alchemy stuff where they tweaked cards and changed how they were presented on Arena, as it was printed in paper, is not good enough.
And also, I believe Alchemy added several elf or changelings into the mix in order to make it so that those elves would be relevant. Something.
Yeah.
Which, it is what it is. But I would agree that in a elf constructed deck, this is something that you probably want to throw in, especially if you're doing green-black elves, because green-black elves, they often want a little more that mono-green elves can probably do better a lot of times. And so with this green-black elf, you're getting some black mana, which means that you can get into the way that deck wants to play.
So evaluating for deck context and preference is very important when you're looking at any particular card, any which way, constructed or otherwise. But looking at this versus the most recent printing, Tyvar Jubilant Brawler.
Tyvar Jubilant Brawler, is 1 a black and a green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. 3 mana, 3 loyalty. We're already looking good. A static ability of you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. I'm sorry. So that means that anything that has a tap ability on it, any creature, you can tap it right away for that ability. It has a +1 to untap up to 1 target creature, and it has a -2 to mill 3 cards. And you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Self-mill, recursion of creatures 2 or less, and those creatures, if they have activated abilities, are hasted for the ability.
Yeah, it's the same thing on those who play Commander will recognize that from 1,000-Year Elixir. Actually, also the untap ability, hilariously. So Tyvar Jubilant Brawler is basically 1,000-Year Elixir and also has like this other thing where it can get you some card advantage and some free creatures, because likely if you're playing elves, you got little ones, but any sort of green-black is going to have something that you're going to want to pop in and out. The cat.
Cauldron Familiar.
Cauldron Familiar. Hey, we got there. Yep. Cauldron Familiar, of course, being the 1 mana 1/1 cat that when it enters the battlefield, your opponents lose a life and you gain a life.
Yep.
And you can sacrifice a food to bring it from the graveyard to the battlefield. So that you want in your graveyard for a bunch of reasons. Stitcher's Supplier, when it dies or enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards. That's another 1/1 for 1. Oh, by the way, touching back on the vanilla scale, you see how in Constructed, the vanilla scale goes right out the friggin' window? Like, a 1/1 for 1 is not good enough. It has to do something. We've already outlined 2 of them.
Yep.
So, like, comparing these two side by side, like, and we know my opinion on it. as far as like a theme of your deck goes. Like the original Tyvar Kell, would you? We're going to touch on mine after. I'm going to ask you, which would you put into an elf deck?
So if I only have the choice between one of them and I want to put it into an elf deck, I am going to be playing Jubilant Brawler. And the reason that I'm going to be playing Jubilant Brawler is that I think that Jubilant Brawler has the activated ability as though they have haste. The way I'm reading that is this is a different mana ramp for green black, where while green black has plenty of ramp, it doesn't have the ramp that mono green generally tends to have. And so this is a way to go Llanowar Elf, tap it immediately for that green mana. Elves of Deep Shadow, tap it immediately for that black mana. Get out a little 1/1 black elf. And all of that is done off of 1 mana on your turn because of Tyvar's ability. Plus, in Golgari Elves, there's no shortage of 2 mana value 2 or less creatures that you're going to be playing. You want some self-mill things in there anyway, because anyone who plays green-black knows that self-mill and recursion is a huge portion of that format, just in general. Just that color combination makes that happen. So I love that this gives haste. This is, if I'm thinking in terms of pure power and what I want to put in my deck, this is it. However, if we're playing elves, why play Tyvar Kell instead?
Oh, we're asking me?
Yeah.
Because of all the different times it says elves on the card.
Exactly.
Like, if you were to put, like, just look at this strictly from the perspective of an elf deck, the +1 is actually kind of butts. I don't really care about that. Mm-hmm. But Tyvar Kell's 0 ability that makes a 1/1, the more bodies you can have on the battlefield is the better as far as elf decks are concerned. The static ability of having all of your critters then tap for a black mana, while, like, for example, a Llanowar Elves that taps for either a black or a green just ends up being way more flexible for you. And any of the other elves that maybe, like the Elf Lords that don't tap for any mana, the Elvish Champion. Oh, I suppose I should read that out. Hold on here.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, elves get +1/+1 and Forest Walk. So it's a good finisher, but if you're not getting it out early enough, or you're getting it out too early, it just kind of sits there waiting to get destroyed. So it being able to tap for mana is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, you know, buffing everything else is all well and dandy if you plan on using that for anything. But like you said, if it goes out too early, it's just begging to be blown up. Mm-hmm. But at least it gives things like that, which you're going to have a lot of in an elf deck, because a lot of their synergies come from how many elves you control and which ones of them are buffing all your other elves. There's tons of elf lords. So this gives them some versatility and some utility throughout the course of the game. And then if you do manage to pull off that emblem, again, as I said, it basically says you win now.
Mm-hmm. And I agree on the idea, too, that from a flavor perspective, you're playing an elf deck and you want to stay in flavor. You're not playing any non-elves or very few non-elves. You're not playing changelings because that's cheating. That's not really an elf or something like that. Then Tyvar Kell is the more on flavor solution, because it's not just good for any deck. It's specifically good for decks that say that word, elf. So you end up wanting to play within the confines of that. And since we play Commander and philosophy of deck is important, that's something that people might take into account. Of course, since we also play Commander, we can just play both.
Yeah, I'm totally jamming both of these. Like, don't you doubt for 1 second. I actually have an Abzan elf deck that I've had for, I don't know, how old is Commander?
Yeah, it's
a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
Actually, when just a little sidebar, when Kaldheim came out and made black-green elves more prolific than their Eventide counterparts, I then decided to switch my then Selesnya elves into an Abzan elves, because there was so much good stuff coming out of Kaldheim for the green-black elves. So just so you know, like, you can change stuff at any time when your opinion changes and new cards come out, because you're going to evaluate cards and reevaluate cards as other things come out, and you're going to see how they compare to other stuff. So always be open-minded about your cards, and always be asking, like, is this card doing what I want? is this card good enough for the things I'm trying to accomplish? Does it satisfy my needs both in my deck and in my heart?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Unless you're playing sealed because you're probably in a competitive setting, and just dunk them. Just pick the one that's big.
Yeah. No. I agree with that.
I'm
talking about Commander specifically, but you're absolutely right. Play the best cards and crush your opponents because they're there to crush you when you're in any sort of competitive. If you're there in draft, hate draft all the good stuff, even if you're not. Like I didn't actually draft during Theros, but if I did and I wasn't in white blue, I would absolutely snap that thing up just so my opponents didn't get it. Mm-hmm. Hate drafting is a thing, and I'm not above it.
And I think that like generally we've given you now all the tools to look at card evaluation, but maybe you're still thinking, hey, I still don't know how to evaluate cards. I'm bad at looking at a card and saying, is this good or is this bad? For you, we've got a special game today. Adam, you want to tell them about the game that we're playing?
Yeah, if you want to get one ready for us.
Sure.
We are going to play Is This Card Good? We're going to look up a random card on Scryfall. We're actually like actively, as recording, pressing the random card button. So this isn't like predetermined at all. It's going to come up. One of us is going to read it, and then we're going to discuss. Is this card good in Commander, Draft, Sealed, and something we haven't talked about in a little bit, but we're still going to touch on it because I like it a lot. Is this good in Cube? And we're going to get into each one of those and just kind of briefly discuss. If there's enough time before the end of recording, we might do 2, but we're for sure going to do 1. What have you got for us, Matt?
All right. Well, this was a very interesting card that got pulled up by the randomizer. We're going to talk about Vesuva. That's V-E-S-U-V-A. Yeah, this is wild. Just to pull back the curtain a little bit, y'all, we did film this once and had to stop for things, and before we ended up getting a very different card that was very old and kind of gave us like some can't we use this kind of vibes. Vesuva is a card that people actually kind of know, so this is going to be a little different than the last one that we did. So I think the best place to start with this is talking about what it does. Adam, why don't you tell them what...
Yeah, this one's going to be super easy. There's so few words by comparison. Vesuva is a land, and you may have Vesuva enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land on the battlefield.
No.
Where do we start? Let's go with draft. Tell me about draft.
So let's go ahead and talk about the sets that this is in. So Vesuva has only come out a few times. It was in a From the Vault set, which is not a set, so would not be played in draft there. It's on the list, which is that set of cards that comes in newer packs that are from older sets to give people the impression that things are being reprinted.
Set boosters specifically.
And then it came in Time Spiral and Time Spiral Remastered. What is in Time Spiral Remastered, which I would say is probably the more popular variant of drafting in these two groupings. So just in case people don't know about it, Time Spiral is a set from way back in the day that was pretty good. It was a pretty solid set for its time period. But since then, cards have had something of a shift in power level. So they decided to do a remastered version of the set, which is essentially a lot of the cards from Time Spiral that people care about, that make a difference, that touch their hearts, and a bunch of stuff from Dominaria groupings in general that reflect the spirit of drafting in the Time Spiral environment. And it's all put together into one draftable format. It was a ancillary product, so it wasn't one of the primary blockings of things. You could buy it. It was more than a booster box, but I don't think it was super expensive. But it was something for you to relive the feeling of playing Time Spiral Remastered without necessarily reliving the feel bad parts of Time Spiral. So that being said, the lands in this set are pretty low in terms of things that you can do. They threw in Urza's Factory, which can get you a 2/2 assembly worker for 7. It's got things like Terramorphic Expanse, which lets you search for land. It's got the basics, obviously. It has Swarm Yard, which you can tap for a colorless mana, or you can tap it to regenerate a target insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. It has Care Keep, which lets you get kobolds. It's got a couple of the storage lands, which can give you mana of either of one of two colors, but you have to give it counters first and then take the counters off. Now, I didn't get to actually draft a lot of Time Spiral Remastered. I think I got to go to a sealed event once. It was okay. It was fun. Like, there was cool stuff going on, but I think it was more meant to be drafted than it was to be sealed. I think that with these particular lands as your play, Vesuva is probably not something that you want to really be getting into.
So I will point out that like Vesuva says any land, so your opponent's lands could count.
It's true. It's true. Vesuva does say
and I'm not saying that it changes the overall valuation, but I think it does add a little bit more flexibility than what we're seeing.
Absolutely, and like the fact that it comes out tapped in a draft format is not really that bad. That's fine as long as you are copying something worthwhile. So if it's going to get you mana colors that you need, like sometimes even being able to play it just to copy a mountain or a forest that you already have in play will give you a little bit of leeway on your color. It's almost like playing a dual land, like an MDFC land, just for one of the colors that you already have in play, except it's tapped. So
I will say that if you get this in like Time Spiral Remastered, you do have a few more options. Not a whole ton, but we end up with things along the lines of like Bajuka Bog was in one of the time shifted slot is a big part of this. So like Bajuka Bog, Blighted Woodland, Field of Ruin. There was a couple spots or a couple lands that could show up in the time shifted slot that you or your opponent could have drafted. Mystic Sanctuary.
Oh yeah, and then things like Arena. Arena is a really good thing to be able to pick up as well, where you get to fight your opponent's stuff if you want to. And so this is one of those areas where definitely being able to pick up your opponent's stuff is very useful.
Mm-hmm. So, but nonetheless, like even in TSR, even in Time Spiral Remastered, there are 23 cards where the type is land, and one of those is Vesuva. So how many of these would you want to copy? Would you want to use your Vesuva to make a Terramorphic Expanse? No. Would you want it to make what's the other one? The Gemstone Caverns, because it's not going to come in with the counter when you copy it with Vesuva.
Yep.
So all in all, would you say Vesuva is a good draft pick?
I would say no. If you're looking to draft in Time Spiral Remastered, you're probably not going to want to pick Vesuva unless for some reason you've got a better land that you want to make sure that you get another chance to do. Cool, but probably not. And in Sealed, even worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, even worse. I was going to actually follow that up with like, how about Sealed? But then I realized that like Sealed is way more difficult to make consistency happen. And so I would say even less in Sealed. And if I know that, then you know for sure that that's
right. But since we've talked about the sealed implications, let's talk about one of the constructed implications. How do you think this does, I don't know, in Commander?
This is going to be a short conversation. Vesuva in Commander is a slam dunk. If you have one, run it. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. Just slam it in a deck. Just make sure it's not sitting in a binder somewhere. And it does not matter which deck. You're going to find a land. Hell, you draw this and all you see is a bunch of basics and one command tower. You windmill slam that thing on the table and say it's a command tower now. There is never no target for a Vesuva in Commander.
Nope. I think that's absolutely true. And I think that...
Send tweet.
Yeah. A lot of people forget some of the things that you can do with Vesuva that you can't do with other kinds of things. Like you can You can have Vesuva come in as a copy of like your opponent's Valakut or something like that. Like you can take control of really big utility lands that your opponents are using. And even if you like copied a Ghost Quarter because you didn't have anything better to copy, being able to destroy a land that you didn't normally put in your deck in order to be able to destroy a land, it's pretty good.
Right? Slam dunk. Just make sure it's not in a binder. That's my only advice. This will go in any commander deck you own, period.
And I would say the bulk of the reason why this card is worth like $11-ish is probably Commander.
Yeah, it's probably Commander.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it saw. I mean, unless there was something in. No. I can't think of any other format that
I can't either.
This would be good at. So.
Yeah, in whatever standards that it would have been in, it would have been considered Type 2 at the time when Time Spiral first came out. There just wasn't enough like utility lands being used across the board that were like super helpful for this kind of thing. So Commander is definitely where this card shines, but boy does it shine when you
my god,
when you get to use things.
Windmill Slam.
What about Cube?
Cube is an interesting one, and ever since we saw this card, that's the one that's been like tumbling around the back of my mind. I kind of had an idea, roughly speaking, of like draft and sealed when you were talking about it, and you didn't really surprise me. We agree fully on Commander. Now, Cube is the interesting one though, because Cube is where you're going to have the most control over what it could target. It's definitely going to be like cube dependent, but I would say that yes, you should put it in your cube if you have, I would say, at least 5% of your cube being non-basic lands. I would say that, like, yeah.
I think that's a reasonable idea. Basically, the notion is, and again, you know, we talked about context dependency, but this is also a context of how do you build your cube. If Vesuva's in a cube, that means that somebody built the cube. So hopefully they built the cube knowing that they weren't just playing, you know, all basics past that. Like, if they wanted Vesuva in the cube, that means that they wanted Vesuva to be able to target something that would be worthwhile to be. So hopefully they are running at least a couple of utility lands in there, or if not utility lands, some cool dual lands, so that it could be like, well, worst case scenario, I can copy my opponent's, you know, Flooded Strand or something like that, you know?
Yeah, like, in my personal Commander cube, I don't have a slot for Vesuva. I will say that. I do have, roughly speaking, I would say I have like a 5-ish%. Let's see here. 35 lands out of 432 cards. So actually it's closer to like 8%. So I have 8% non-basics in my cube, because you don't really want to have to target a basic if you can get away with it.
If you can help it.
But I specifically went with a bunch of the common and uncommon, like, dual lands to help fixing in my cube, but I don't have a single rare land in the cube, period. So, like, would I put it in mine? No. But if I was to tune up my cube, if I was to have it higher power, and I did put in a full set of shocks, and I did put in a full set of, like, I don't know, Tango lands, a full set of, you know, like, if I was to flesh out the fixing to be more efficient, then maybe I would consider it, because then there's viable targets for it. So I would say that if you're looking at putting Vesuva in your cube, see what it can target, and more importantly, see what it might break. Like, if you're the kind of cube that you've got a Gaia's Cradle in there, and then you put a Vesuva in there, like, you're going to have some big swingy games, because somebody's going to drop their Gaia's Cradle that they're going to immediately snap pick, regardless of color. They're going to change colors right then and there. And then they're going to, like, somebody else is going to see that and then drop the Vesuva and get their own Gaia's Cradle. And now you got 2 Gaia's Cradles in your pod. So just kind of take a look and see at what your overall draft environment looks like before putting it. Like we discussed in the draft environment in Time Spiral Remastered or even the original.
Mm-hmm.
This was a bad pick because there was nothing good to target. So if your cube doesn't have anything good to target, this is going to be a bad pick. And if it has really good stuff to target, then it's going to be a great pick, and it's going to come out in your games. So know what kind of games you're going to want to get into with your cube before you start putting something in that can like just duplicate an effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and you know, like I had said, the last time that we did this, the card was something that you may have overlooked before. And we're going to keep doing these because we think they're fun. So every once in a while, you're going to see a card that you may not see the full use of. But an interesting thing about this one in particular is that knowing more about the things that you're doing increases the value of this particular card. So without any knowledge of a set at all, you should probably pass this. If it were suddenly to come out, say, in Commander Masters, right? If you know nothing about Commander Masters coming in and you see Vesuva, you might pass it. Because you're just like, if this is... I don't know anything about the set. I don't know what's good. I don't know what's bad. So I wouldn't want to be stuck with this land that does nothing if it actually does nothing, right?
Yeah.
But the more you know about the set and the more research or experience you have in that environment, the better you can make that choice. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, and this goes for any card in any limited environment or format in general. Like and you're not going to know it from day one. But if you start getting invested, you're going to end up looking in. You're going to go onto podcasts such as this one. You're going to go onto various websites like 17 Lands and EDH Rec, and you're going to learn what's out there. And then from there, you're going to start building your understanding of each format. So hopefully what we did today can give you a bit of an idea. And as Matt said, we are going to do the random Scryfall evaluations because we found them very fun. And I think that's probably the best one. So, gang, you can find more random Scryfall evaluations and more of all this fun stuff next time on Unlimited Commander. We will see you next time. If you liked what we had to say, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support goes directly to growing and improving the show.
You can also like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Make sure to comment or leave a review. The cast can also be found on Twitter at Unlimited Commander.
You can find Matt's Twitch, Twitter, and other YouTube projects at knowledgepoolmtg.com.
And Adam can be found on Twitch and Twitter at Adamus_Prime86.
Our theme song is Polaroid by Harris Heller, licensed by Creative Commons.